Morning, folks. Now on to the fourth installment of my response videos to Max Stirner's The Ego in Its Own. Or excuse me, I should say the fifth response. Not much to say about the beginning of this passage because much of the beginning is him repeating his point about the spiritual being made up of ideas rather than material and fleshly content. And how this is a very youthful idea in comparison to the man who has more egoistic concerns that put certain ideals and ideas behind pragmatic concerns for one's individual interests. The latter portion is where it gets interesting, though, because there he expands on a point, on Descartes' famous point, cogito ergo sum, which you mentioned earlier back in the Ancients portion, but I didn't spend a good amount of time on it because I wasn't sure exactly what he was going to do with that point. He had mentioned a whole list of philosophers as a means of making his points about the ancients, from Socrates to Democritus and so on. But I guess I should have paid a little more attention to his citation of Descartes because it becomes pretty crucial to his point regarding the spirit. That is, the spirit we know is true because, the spirit brings itself into existence by creating itself first. Again, butting off Descartes, it's the idea that thoughts, the mind exists because you have to, if you were to say doubt that the mind exists, you'd have to have something to do the doubting. Like, what is that doubting if not an idea? I am doubting my existence or my mental state or spirit, whatever. So the spirit necessarily creates itself by the mere existence of thought, essentially. And I think it's very important we understand this because his next chapter deals with the hierarchy, is where I believe we will be going into egoism, in which case we will eventually discuss how the ego comes into play. Now, I will venture to guess, again, haven't read this in advance, but I would venture to guess that Stirner's argument for how we know the ego exists it mirrors the argument for how the spirit exists very tightly. That is, just as the spirit and thoughts exist because of the very fact that we thinking about those thoughts must prove their existence, so therefore an ego insists on its own existence, because if we are to think of our individual interests, the very fact that we as individuals can imagine interests we have that may not necessarily benefit God, society, the nation, the prince, so on, a number of other various egos, both individual and collective, that he cites. That would be my guess as for his proof as to how the ego creates itself. Because after all, he does refer to himself as the creator of nothing in the opening, the introduction, all things are nothing to me. And I was confused as to what exactly he was getting at. I didn't properly understand what creator of all things, or out of nothingness, truly meant. But I think I'm getting a grip out of what the nothingness is and what the creator of nothing he is. At least that's my speculation, because on the spirit, the spirit is the creator of, he uses very similar phrases throughout this selection. I must say, obviously he's trying to hammer in that thesis on egoism, but I'm just trying to understand each part to make sure I understand the full argument in order to criticize, refute, or perhaps agree with it. I probably will not agree with it, at least not in full, but I want to see how he gets to this conclusion, which it's very clear what his conclusion is. It's just a mystery as to how he's going to make a case for it. He's already shown that ancients had a very materialistic mindset. The Christians, the moderns, focused more in ideas and spirit. So now that he's shown how spiritual beliefs come forth, I think it'll be pretty soon he'll demonstrate how egoistic beliefs come forth. And I think that's when things will get rather interesting. Anyways, that's all I have to say. The rest is, again, just old ground, so I'm not going to cover it. Thank you for listening, and join me in the next edition of the Ego in Its Own series. Thank you.